Vladimir Putin is a no-show in Istanbul while Russian drones hit hundreds of targets in Ukraine. Expectations for peace talks were dashed over the weekend, prompting the U.S. president to claim he will speak to Russia's leader directly to stop the war. But is there really a path forward for dialogue and peace? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Ukraine. News teams from around the world descended on Istanbul Thursday, hoping proposed talks on Ukraine would yield a pivotal deal. All were left disappointed. And over the weekend, Russian drone attacks on Ukraine escalated to new highs. President Putin says Russia has enough strength and resources to bring about the result it needs, indicating Moscow is prepared to continue until those needs are met. Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump plans to speak to Putin on the phone to move the process forward. So if Trump is the key player for peace, that's good news. If not, Ukraine could be in for a long ride. Here's a look.
It was meant to be the most highly anticipated diplomatic meeting between Russia and Ukraine in years. The possibility of a face-to-face meeting between Ukraine's president and Russia's president was dangled in front of the world. Zelensky travelled to Turkey's capital Ankara on Thursday, a day before the talks. But doubts that Putin would show up proved correct. The Kremlin instead announcing it would send delegates to the negotiating table in Istanbul the next day. Zelensky, still in Ankara, criticised the team Putin sent to Istanbul.
After we understood the level of the Russian delegation, we see that, unfortunately, they are taking the real negotiations very unseriously. So far, we do not see among those present anyone who actually makes decisions. Although I want to remind you, it was Russia who proposed direct negotiations. There was also personal support from President Trump that leaders should meet.
Despite his disappointment, Zelensky, who instead went to Albania for a European leaders summit, sent a Ukrainian team led by his defense minister to Istanbul. It marked the first time Ukrainian and Russian teams met for negotiations since March 2022. No ceasefire agreement was reached, but there was some headway made.
Our first priority was people, and that's why we negotiated to free 1,000 people, and we reached to a conclusion, reach to an agreement to exchange 1,000 people. It is important achievement, and that once again shows that we are focused to finalize this war.
And from the Russian side, an acknowledgement of the desire for a future meeting between presidents.
The Ukrainian side has requested direct talks between the heads of state. We have taken note of this request.
Back in Albania, Zelensky labelled the Russian delegation theatrical and said Russia should be dealt with swift sanctions if they cannot deliver. EU leaders are under increasing pressure to target Russia's shadow fleet, which consists of oil tankers sailing under a flag of convenience, with questionable ownership and dubious insurance documentation, secretly carrying Russian crude oil out of the Baltic Sea for export. Russian oil is placed under heavy embargoes, but this shadow fleet allows Russia to skirt sanctions and bring in revenue.
We will continue to increase the pressure on Russia. On Tuesday, we want to bring the 17th sanctions package into force in the European Union. Among other things, this will target the so-called shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea.
So were the talks in Istanbul a first step on a slow but momentum-building path to peace? Or were they, as Zelensky said, unserious? A theatrical delay tactic offering nothing of substance and destined to fizzle out.
Well, joining me now to talk about where the process stands and whether Donald Trump can prove the true dealmaker are, from Ivano-Frankivsk, Ukraine, founder and director of the Ukrainian campaign group Razom We Stand, Svetlana Romanko. From London, visiting Senior Research Fellow at King's College London, Anna Matvieva. And from Washington, Republican strategist Amanda Mackey. Thanks all so much for being with me. Let's first, if we can, look back at this weekend. It marked the biggest drone attack on Ukraine since the start of the war. Some interpret this, massive strike as potentially a kind of final show of force before actually entering into negotiations. Just to, restate, we have the upper hand. Svetlana, would you see it as that?
Oh, yes, I would definitely see it as that, but I also acknowledging that we are speaking for the Turkish TV. I just would like to express our gratitude for all of the recent peace efforts made in Turkey, and especially for President Erdogan, who has expressed an interest into supporting the peace process. But of course, much more needs to be done, as we see currently that Russia does not actually want that peace, because the ceasefire was not still achieved. And also, Russia still keeps achieving and getting more fossil fuel profits from oil trade. And of course, we want Turkey, the European Union, the United States of America as a very powerful state and states
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'd like to talk further about sanctions and then the moves toward potentially imposing more, as Europe in particular has said it plans to do. But Anna, let me ask you basically the same question. Do you think, again, this was a massive strike. It was the biggest in more than 3 years now of war. Anna, do you think, a sign of this is what we are dealing with, this is what you'll be facing, we will go into negotiations, but know what you're dealing with and that we do have the strength and we will stay with that strength until our needs, as Putin has phrased it, are met?
This strike happened as a response to Ukrainian strike on the 7th of May, when 524 drones were launched onto Russia. Most of them, they did not hit the targets, but they were, of course, aiming at both military and civilian targets. I was in Russia at the time. Yeah, one drone nearly landed on our village, which is purely kind of private houses. So in that sense, both sides are doing things which are pretty hostile towards each other. There were also 2 assassinations in Russia of Russian generals. Ukraine didn't take responsibility, but obviously that's something which everybody is speculating about. So yes, both sides are doing pretty a lot of hostile moves, but at the same time they did meet. They agreed to a biggest war prisoner swap. 1,000 prisoners from each side would be exchanged. They also agreed to present each other with further proposals for ceasefire. So yes, there are sides, both drivers both for war and both for peace, and none of the sides is totally innocent. Today, Russian side has published their data that 621 civilians in Russia have been hit in Ukrainian strikes. This is the first time we have this official data coming from the Russian side.
Interesting. Anna, quickly though, do you think the progress that you mentioned there, starting with the prisoner swap, for example, is kind of being underplayed by the media only because the leaders haven't met yet, but still these other delegations sent actually did make some progress that isn't being highlighted?
I think political class and media has some pretty unrealistic expectations on how fast that kind of intractable, bitter conflict can be resolved. It is not something which can be done in 24 hours.
Okay.
It will be something which will go one step forward, 2 steps back. There will be setbacks, there will be recriminations. That's totally normal if we think about, for example, Camp David. That's what we have heard, but in the end, it was a successful negotiation.
Okay. Interesting perspective. Let me ask Amanda, though, because, it's fair for Anna, perhaps, to make that analysis because it was sold to the media by President Trump that this would be finished quickly, that he had the keys to get the deal done. So at this point, do you see him really moving the process forward? Is he the actual deal maker here, or did he oversell what his potential was?
Well, any negotiation requires two parties, two willing parties. And President Trump has surely shown that he is willing. Yes, he said it would be done in the first 100 days. The 100 days have come and passed. But that doesn't mean that President Trump hasn't tried. Really, we have to look at what Vladimir Putin has been doing, which is moving the goalpost. And he's been making promises, empty promises, breaking promises. And so really this call today between President Trump and Vladimir Putin is really critical, because the next steps are sanctions, and that's where Congress wants to go. Congress has a bill lined up. It was introduced last month, has over 70 sponsors in the Senate. It's hard to get 70 people to agree on anything, 70 out of 100 senators, but they have a bipartisan bill to impose 500% tariffs on Russia. And so America is going to do everything that it can to put pressure on Putin. But a lot of people are saying that President Trump needs to do more. I think this call today is going to tell us a lot.
Yeah. But I mean, Amanda, just quickly, do they really believe that sanctions are somehow an answer here? I mean, that they've done very little, arguably some would say nothing, to push Putin into the corner that they expected him to be backed into via sanctions.
Well, look, they export oil. Russia exports oil and missiles. That's what they do. So you got to hit them with third-party sanctions on countries like India, China, Brazil. But that's where you got to hit them in the pocketbook. And so if you can do that, you have leverage. This is about a leverage game. And so they're going to try to do what they can. Again, remember, the backdrop of this is that in the Republican Party, almost 80% of Republicans don't want involvement in this war, in this conflict. And so President Trump is doing what he can to bring about peace. His post on Truth Social was that 5,000 people are dying, men and women are dying every week in these two countries. And so he wants to bring peace. He's going to do what he can. I think people are saying you got to do more to get Putin to the table, because Putin has invaded a sovereign nation and continues to build ground. He wants to go straight to Kiev. And so for President Trump, this is about something that he has promised and said that he would do. But understand, his party is not necessarily interested in continuing to fight this conflict for Ukraine.
Anna, I just have to come back to you quickly and ask, I mean, is Putin moving the goalposts, as Amanda has defined it?
Well, everybody is trying to outsmart everybody else. And we have a very convoluted, very haphazard, sometimes pretty contradictory process, because you have Americans negotiating, you have also direct track between Russia and Ukraine. It was secret. Now we know that it's happening in the open. We also have Europeans there. So in that sense, Russia is playing a game, but everybody else is playing a game. So we cannot say that it is something which, all actors are trying to push towards peace. Both actors, Russia and Ukraine, are prepared both for war and peace options. And Russia would settle for peace, that's my conviction, but only if conditions are good. The decisive moment would be the phone call as we speak in an hour's time between Trump and Putin. If they agree to meet, then we know that's going somewhere.
Okay. Svetlana, you know, President Trump had said before this that all of this really, it's kind of Europe's problem. So, you know, this is their backyard. They need to deal with it. And they haven't stepped up as far as military defense is concerned, the United States believes, over the past decades even. So do you worry that that might be his default here if he doesn't get what he wants, just to say, you know what, fine, Europe, you deal with it?
No, I would not worry because I truly believe in President Trump's capacity to solve the war in the most strong and peaceful manner. But also, we should never forget who started this invasion, and Russia is the only aggressor to be blamed. And of course, Ukraine withdrawing from occupied territories, which hold Ukraine's sovereignty, is not possible and acceptable. And I believe all democratic leaders of the free world understand this, and I truly believe as well that these peace negotiations will be fair, will be enforced by a very strong sanctions on Russian aggressor, because 150,000 of registered war crimes across Ukraine that have been committed with atrocities and violence by Russian troops are still registered. They are all on the books, and also tens of thousands of Ukrainian children kidnapped to Russia, and this is terrible what is happening. So I think it's just exactly a time for President Trump to call for stronger sanctions, getting into full alignment with European leaders who also put a lot of efforts in defense, in protection of Ukraine, but also into developing some fair peace deal, which will be, of course, good for Ukraine, good for Europe. And only the thing I wanted to say is that Ukraine can't accept those conditions that have been actually very false conditions that Putin has proposed through his delegation just recently in Turkey. So, the only way to defeat Russia is just to impose as much strict sanctions as it could be possible on Russian oil and gas, including sanctioning the shadow fleet, including fully banning the LNG, liquefied natural gas trade to Europe, and depriving Russia of premium gas market in Europe, and also putting in secondary sanctions, as was rightly pointed out by U.S. Congress. And we really appreciate and thankful for your bold action and intention of the 70 Congress representatives for imposing such a high tariffs. This all must end now, and the sanctions must be imposed as a next step leading to a peace negotiations.
Yeah. Let me ask Anna about that, though. I mean, Svetlana seems to think a big part of the answer here lies in sanctions, and whether the EU and the U.S. will impose them, rather. There's the EU especially has threatened, not least via saying they will crack down on the Baltic Sea shadow fleet that's transporting a lot of Russian oil and gas. Anna, do you see the EU stepping up to do that?
I think it's a delusion to think that sanctions would actually put that kind of pressure on Russia that it will completely break its economy. The first 4 rounds of sanctions introduced in 2022, they were really cryptic. Russian economy went down 2.2%. It was difficult. But since then, it has returned to growth. They have managed to work around sanctions. In some sectors, actually, they strengthened their hand. In terms of U.S. Congress, yes, there is a lot of rhetoric. I'm not quite sure whether President Trump would be prepared to hurt American public, American taxpayers so greatly that just for the sake of Ukraine. I think that he is trying to have a fair dealing with major trading partners like India, like Turkey, redefine the rules of the game for American people, for American economy. I'm not sure that he is going to declare the whole economic war on the world just for the sake of Ukrainian survival. So yes, it would inconvenience Russia, but not something that we would consider as option.
Okay, Amanda, go ahead.
Well, I mean, Anna makes a great point. I mean, is President Trump going to disrupt the U.S. economy? And, we do have elections coming up next year, our midterm elections. And so he certainly doesn't want to see the Senate or Congress, the House, lose Republicans. And so that's a great point. However, this is in the backdrop of a major international issue crisis, I would say, that President Trump has inserted himself in. So I think he wants to do whatever he can, but also remember these sanctions and what Congress can do is independent. It's an independent three branches co-equal of the government, but Congress has the ability to move forward with this. And when you have something that has such bipartisan support because of what's happening right now in Congress, I mean, President Trump still has leverage, but Congress can still move this forward. And Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, who has introduced this bill, he is a Trump ally. But I think people are growing impatient, and certainly Republicans are growing impatient. They don't want to say anything because they want Trump to lead on this. But certainly Republicans and, of course, Democrats, they want to see some kind of action happen because, as we've been discussing, this was a sovereign nation that was invaded. Putin hasn't. He's been relentless. He hasn't stopped, and he is going to continue to acquire land. He doesn't seem to be at all fazed by any of these talks or discussions. He certainly thumbed his nose at, Ukraine last week and going to Turkey. So these are the types of things that I think President Trump is just trying to get everyone to the table. And he has said nothing is going to happen without me talking with Putin. So today is the first step. So let's see what happens.
Okay. I mean, Svetlana, Amanda was saying there that Putin is simply just going to continue. But he's said simply that Russia, needs to eliminate the causes that created the crisis in the first place. I mean, it's very simply phrased, but is that what Ukraine fears? Is that how he defines those actual causes? What do you think Russia is really after in the end that makes it impossible for Ukraine to negotiate with?
Everyone who is a bit familiar with the history of Ukraine included knows that this is absolutely incorrect, and Putin has his own perverted picture of where Ukraine needs to be, while it's a very sovereign country, independent country that maintains international solidarity as well. And invading Ukraine is a huge act of terrorism and violence, and this is an international crime. And I believe there will be responsibility put on Putin quite soon in appropriate court instead of those negotiations, which he is not willing to take for real. And also just mentioning the point on the EU and how EU went successfully from paying 705 million of euros daily for Russian oil and gas in 2022, when the war just started, full-scale invasion, up to 48 millions per day that they were paying in April right now. If we see that decline in financing the Russia's war crimes in Ukraine has been quite significant, and the profits that Russia is getting are really decreasing exponentially, and Putin will soon have to choose tanks or paying pensions, because as we know, Russian economy has been now managed in a very manual manner by the central bank, and people can't really hide that fact. People on the high positions in Russia, that Russia's economy is failing due to the sanctions in particular as well. So the less access to the fossil fuel funds they have, the sooner we will see the end of these terrific atrocities and also dictatorship, which is led by President Putin.
Okay, Anna, we have 2 minutes left. I saw you disagreeing with some things that Amanda said, as well as some things that Svetlana was just saying there. So go ahead.
Just for a record, last year Russian economy grew 4.5%. This year's forecast is 2.5%. So it's not really an economy in shambles. But the important thing is that what is now crucial point: peace for Ukraine or punishing Putin. And these are two contradictory goals. If we think that peace in Ukraine is the bigger value, that means that Putin has to be dealt, and some compromises will have to be reached. But of course, if the most important thing is to punish Putin leadership and punish Russian government and Russian people, that of course continuation of war would be something which will serve this goal nicely.
Okay. We actually have 30 seconds left. So, Amanda, I can give you some quick final thoughts.
I mean, just that how important and how crucial today's call is. I think, the world is looking on to see what happens and really what happens after this. Do we reach a ceasefire that will actually be agreed upon, or do we enter into some kind of negotiation? This is really what the world stage is paying attention to today. And we're all hopeful. And certainly President Trump has, kind of claimed his presidency on making peace. That's what really he wants to see for these two nations. So let's see what happens today. As I've said, this is a really crucial day in this 3 years that has been an ongoing bloodbath.
Okay. That will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists, really, so much for being with me. Our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media. And do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.